Oh no, toxic empathy. Run, hide. It's taking over. People are being overly empathetic and it's ruining the world. Hello from New York City. I happen to be here at the tail end of a business trip, and I thought this would probably be the most appropriate place to respond to a couple of New York Times articles that appeared in July about empathy. Okay, first, delighted that the New York Times decided to dedicate more space to the concept of empathy and even warnings about the dark side and the way that empathy is getting twisted. And I'll have more on that dark side of empathy in a minute. So, 2 days in a row in July, there were two different articles, one on each day, on the notion of toxic empathy and then the weaponization of empathy by cultural conservatives. Thanks, obviously, to everybody who sent those to me, forwarded them to make sure they were on my radar. I had read the first one. I was not aware that the second one had posted, and then people were sending me the second one, but I thought it was the first one. And then when I opened up the New York Times, I was like, oh, there's two. Here we are. So, following is going to be the gist of the two pieces, as well as my takes. I've put gift links below in the comment or in the show notes if you want to check them out for yourself. The first one is from opinion columnist Ross Douthat, and he interviewed Allie Beth Stuckey. She's the author of Toxic Empathy and the host of a podcast called Relatable, which apparently is quite popular amongst cultural conservatives and evangelicals. And then the second piece was by nonfiction book critic Jennifer Szalai, called, I hope I pronounced that right, and it's called How Empathy Became a Threat. And she then looks at both Stuckey's book as well as another book by Joe Rigney that's called The Sin of Empathy and compares them to Paul Bloom's original Against Empathy because both of them relate to that. And I'll talk about all of that shortly. So, what I see that's happening is that people whose cultural and political views are further to the right than the mainstream, they've decided to take empathy and twist it to suit their own purposes. Rather than accepting that what's actually happening is they're being selective in their use of empathy, and that is what can lead to toxic behavior. So first, let's have a quick refresher on empathy. And if you follow me and have read a lot of my pieces, you know there are two different types of empathy. There's cognitive and emotional or affective empathy. Cognitive empathy is about seeing the point of view of others. Emotional empathy, it's also sometimes called affective empathy, affective. It's the feeling emotions of other people. And neuroscientists like Helen Reese at Harvard and Jamil Zaki at Stanford have found the parts of our brain that actually light up when we're experiencing these types of empathy. That means we are born with this. And other studies have found that the expression of empathy begins around 18 months old, according to some child development specialists who've looked into this. Now, in a lot of situations, I actually think that cognitive empathy is what we most easily tap into. And that's for a couple of reasons. I think part of that is, at least in the United States, we have a discomfort with emotions and really feeling and expressing our emotions with a broader group of people. Additionally, there's a lot of tapes playing about how people are supposed to behave and show up. You particularly see that with men and how younger men are really struggling with the notions of toxic masculinity and how they're supposed to behave in the workplace, with romantic partners, and in life. And that's because of a tension between what had been taught to where society is evolving into, and the tension, the conflict, the paradox between those two, because they're two different things. And then also, I believe we've got to be closer to the other person in order to really have emotional empathy, those shared experiences and values. So to me, that's like your close neighbors, your romantic partner, is a spouse, people that are closest to you in your life. Now, there's that. So there's cognitive and emotional empathy. And then think about having empathy with individuals, but also with broader groups of people. So a broad empathy. And often what we're doing is you're hearing about that broad group, but we're connecting with individuals within that class of people. It's that story of one that is what triggers a response or an action. We're building empathy with one person, one individual story, and then we're able to relate to a larger group of people. In Allie Beth Stuckey's interview with Ross Douthat, she talks about how she believes that this empathy, or that over empathizing with one side and not trying to see the point of view of others, that it perverts people's feelings to go against effectively her beliefs and what she wants their own beliefs to be, or the shared beliefs that she believes they have as conservative evangelical Christians. And her concern is that that's bringing people over from that cultural far right to what she describes as a progressive perspective. Now, so what I found interesting was that despite wanting people to have empathy with both sides, in the interview itself, she gives examples where she's, in one case, talking about a woman who's at the midpoint in her pregnancy and discovering a fetal abnormality that was going to cause the fetus not to be able to survive outside the womb. And Allie Beth says that the left is all focused on empathy with the mother and the emotional and physical suffering and trauma that the mother is having, while she is focused on honoring the humanity of the fetus and providing end-of-life rituals for when the child is actually born, even though it is not a viable pregnancy or is not really going to live. And she feels that the empathy that we have on the left for the mother is misplaced. What I found interesting that in reality, what she's doing is choosing sides on who to have empathy with. She doesn't really comment in the interview, whether you read the transcript or listen to it, that she sees both points of view, that she recognizes the suffering of the mother, but she's sticking to what she's already decided is right for her. And so, what I want to clarify here, and one of the reasons why I felt I needed to do this piece, is that you can actually have empathy with both the mother and the fetus. And when I read Allie Beth's comment in the transcript about honoring the humanity of the child and providing a proper burial, I thought, like, okay, I get that. I can see that. And that's actually, I don't know how much of that is that truly empathy with the child, because the child wouldn't be taught that that's what's supposed to happen, but it's empathy with people that believe in the life of the unborn and the need to provide that for them. So I'm having some cognitive empathy with her perspective on this. But I also do have empathy with the mother and the emotional and physical trauma that she's going to endure, especially if she had to carry that pregnancy to term. And apparently, this was a piece that was on NPR, and Allie Beth talks about how, well, of course, it's NPR and they're left leaning. And so they did focus on the mother instead of looking at that other side. But in this case, as I was just laying out, I'm really trying to see the point of view and identify with both sides. I can have empathy with them, and empathy is something that's neutral. You should be able to see both sides and understand where other people are coming from, as well as where you're coming from. And if I were in a position to weigh in on a private matter like this, I try to use that empathy to inform my thinking. And then alongside that, my own values, my experiences, and maybe I'd do some secondary research looking for scientific data that could support this and use all of that together to make a decision on what I believe would be right. And that's just on abortion. In the interview, she goes on and does this exact same thing on illegal immigration and deportations. And she sides with the current practices of ICE while not acknowledging that, maybe having masked men sweep people up off the street and sending them by the tens of thousands to detention centers, um, sometimes in foreign countries, with no way of contacting relatives or legal counsel, that she doesn't acknowledge that that could even be considered cruel. She believes that it's just, and in her mind, it's justified because we need to have border policy. We need to have sovereignty of the United States. And all of those things are true. And she's like, is there any sort of kind way to sweep people up? Well, I don't know. But it seems like the way that they're doing it isn't working. But she argues that this is what we should be doing. But she's not actually practicing real empathy. She's not practicing what she's preaching. Her faith, her value systems are overruling any empathy with the other side. It's she's failing in that first step to empathy of dismantling your judgment. And she's not even professing that maybe she's struggled with it or that she saw through it. She's like, nope, I'm a cultural conservative. I believe in conservative issues and points of view. And so this is how it is. So she's really being very selective. She's not letting herself see both sides. And so honestly, she's not being empathetic. She's just being political, even though she claims that she's not. And she uses Paul Bloom's book against empathy as her justification. And that's what the second article that Jennifer Szalai, Szalai, wrote. She is a nonfiction book editor or book critic at the Times. And she talks about it. She explores how that weaponization of Paul Bloom's work is coming from. And Paul doesn't say in his book that he's against empathy, but he's really warning that, empathy is supposed to be neutral. So don't let it drive your decisions, and that we need to be balanced with rational thinking in order to make decisions that are well informed, and taking all different perspectives into account. So I know when I'm giving a training or a presentation on empathy, I'm often giving shout outs to the people in the room who may identify as what's known as an HSP, which is a highly sensitive person, or might identify as being an empath. In my mind, these are the people where their empathy is turned on full. They're like the empathy Olympics gold medalists. And yet, if they're not careful, that empathy that they've got for others can overly influence their actions. Sometimes, this is a person you might recognize that expression as a person that wears their heart on their sleeve, where their decisions are really being driven from the heart rather than combined with other rational considerations. I would imagine somebody that's like that. You might even recognize it in yourself, and it's like you do have that superpower, but it is about then figuring out how to marry that up. Because having too much empathy in your decision-making matrix can be just as detrimental as not having enough. And so that's what Paul Bloom was arguing for. And that's what the second article is trying to point out. And it's also what Stuckey and Rigney and others have twisted then to fit their needs. And they're saying that, yeah, having too much empathy is bad, but then they're implying that everybody on the left is just driven by empathy and it's leading us to bad decisions and things that are going against their values. No, not necessarily. It's that we're having a lot of empathy for immigrants and for other people. And it's putting us in a situation where we're calling out cruelty when we're seeing it, but also wanting to work on solutions. Stuckey claims in her interview that she's open to working on solutions. She doesn't have any, but says she also hasn't heard any from the left, and I can't disagree with that point. But she's interested in having that conversation. It's like, okay, we're understanding each other's point of view. You can start to come together. So it's about not being overly empathetic, but also not twisting empathy to fit your own needs or using it to simply justify your worldview. You want to take a considered approach because otherwise you're being opportunistic rather than altruistic. And so I don't feel when I was listening to the things that she was saying in the interview, reading that transcript, I didn't feel that she was truly being empathetic on both sides as the way she claims we're supposed to be. And the second article does point that out, and Jennifer gets in touch with Paul Bloom, and he has a great quote at the very end, which I'll let you read for yourself. Now, at the start of this, I mentioned the dark side of empathy. That's the title of another great New York Times guest essay by Michael Ventura. And that came out, he's another empathy author, and that came out on May 4th, 2025, so just a couple months ago. And in that piece, he makes the case that people can use that neutral understanding of another person, of their perspective, of where they're coming from for nefarious or dark purposes, for manipulation. Just in the same way that we might use empathy for good, and hopefully we're using empathy for good and positive outcomes. Narcissists and sociopaths are known to do this, and I think it can happen to all of us if we're not careful. So be on the lookout when somebody is trying to take advantage of you, as they're probably leveraging their understanding of your feelings or perspective, but doing it for solely their personal gain, but at your expense. And sometimes it's really obvious when it happens, and you can very easily go, whoa, 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 wait a minute. But it isn't always. And so you do have to reflect and take time to be paying attention to that. Now, please be mindful that you're not doing that with others yourself. I'd like to think that we all have everybody's best interests at heart, but I wasn't born yesterday. So, you know, do check yourself as well from time to time. So to recap, two different types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. They are neutral states of understanding and feeling other people. And you use that to inform how you communicate, collaborate, persuade, and maybe even have compassion, which will spark you to take action. And when you're including empathy in your decision making, you want to balance that with other data points, including your own feelings and views. And then you've got empathy with the other people, other data that you might gather, so that you have a rational decision that you've reached with multiple data points coming together. And as I was just talking about, be aware, empathy can be used to manipulate. And finally, always, please stay curious to understanding other people. So thanks for joining me. That is this edition of Reading Between the Lines. You can drop questions in the comments. I will be sure to respond, or you can reach out to me through the socials. Please do like this post if you did. Share it with others and subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss out on future editions, and it helps other people find it so we can spread more understanding of empathy and how to practically apply it. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and may find a moment to use that small dose of courage that we all have inside us to use empathy with somebody else. Thanks a lot.